Well, the record's expunged, that means I get to treat it as if it doesn't exist, and that works everywhere except in immigration. Welcome back to Visa Vibes, the podcast that attempts to bring some clarity to U.S. immigration laws. I'm Emily Newman, managing partner of Reddy Newman Brown PC.
And I'm Stephen Brown. I'm also a partner with Reddy Newman Brown PC. And today's episode, we're going to talk about something that's popping back up again, the green card interview. And this is that infamous final hurdle. You've been waiting for a long time to get your green card, your I-485, approved. And it's kind of part DMV visit where you wait, part job interview, part history test, part trial. And people get stressed, and I think we're going to try to talk people through this, and we're starting to see this pop back up again on the employment-based side, and let's kind of prepare people for it because they're not terrible most of the time.
Yeah. I mean, it is just a part of the process. It's a necessary part of the process. So, what exactly is a green card interview? Like, what's the point of it?
That's a good question. I sometimes ask the officer, like, what triggered it? The green card interview, also known as the adjustment of status, AOS interview, just depending on what terminology you're using. And this is typically that last step in the I-485 process to get your green card. It's where USCIS officer is going to verify that everything in your application is accurate. You're going to give your fingerprints, take a picture again. They're going to go through some questions that they have, and they're going to make a final determination of your eligibility and your admissibility into the United States.
Yeah, kind of like a visa interview that you did at the consulate abroad, but a little more in depth. You're actually going into the officer's office and sitting across the desk from them versus at a window at a consulate. But for marriage-based adjustment of status applications, it's pretty much mandatory that you're going to be interviewed. They want to verify that you are actually married and that you're not getting married just for immigration purposes. But for employment-based interviews, it's a little bit more nuanced. So prior to the previous Trump administration, very few employment-based applicants were interviewed. It generally was a situation where there was maybe some sort of criminal background. And then enter Trump 1.0, and he issued a policy memo saying, we're going to make every single 485 application go through an interview. So we started immediately seeing more and more green card application interviews until COVID hit. And then, we're having to wear masks and stay 6 feet apart, and they're limiting the number of people that can come into the field office for interviews. So they kind of started approving some without an interview again, with these kind of COVID-based waivers. And then when Biden came into office, they pretty much eliminated anything like that. But there were still a little bit more than what there were pre-Trump. So we're not quite back to...
Yeah, I mean, I did a very good handful in 2022, that summer of 2022, where, they're trying to push through and not get sued again for wastage. And that's, the Biden administration. But we're back to the Trump administration, and there hasn't been the announcement. In Trump 1.0, we're going to do interviews for everybody. There was an announcement. It was well documented. We're just not there yet, but we are seeing an increase in green card interviews. And some of them, we can kind of go through when we go through the intake. We talk to folks that are doing this. This is probably the reason. Some of them, not really. It's pretty clean. And it's just coming back, looking at some statistics we kind of found, 2020, 2021, only about 5% interviewed. We're back to kind of 30 to 40, maybe 50%, depending on the situation. Most of them, you're going to get a good amount of lead time. I mean, at least usually about a month, 3 weeks, sometimes less. I mean, USPS is terrible getting anything delivered. So if you haven't gotten one yet, until it says interview waived on your case status page, you might get one, you might not. And we just really don't know.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so we do have some idea of what things can actually trigger an interview. But sometimes they are pretty just random. But generally, if you have to answer yes to any of the questions on the form about a ground of inadmissibility, like have you ever overstayed a visa? Have you ever violated status? Have you ever misrepresented? Have you ever committed a crime? There's a lot of questions on the form. There's like 3 or 4 pages of questions about all of those different things that can be things that make you ineligible for adjustment of status. So if you've had to answer yes to any of those, it could result in an interview. If you've had previous status issues, if you've worked for a company that has maybe not necessarily been blacklisted, isn't the right word for it, but maybe they've had some compliance issues in the past, or maybe they're investigating the company now. They're not going to come out and tell you that, but
Right.
maybe there's an issue with the company. Maybe you've gone to one of the not so good schools that back in the day, Tri Valley, NPU, SPU, Farmington,
Yeah, the Northern New Jersey.
um, criminal history definitely is a big one. Even if you've had your record expunged, even if it was something minor, they do want to, number one, review those original documents and ask you what happened and get your side of the story. And sometimes if you have any weird things with your civil documents, like birth certificates, marriage certificates, they want to verify the validity of those.
But, Emily, we sometimes see these triggers, but sometimes it's purely random. I know I had a case last year. I did a telephonic interview for a gentleman in Denver. No criminal record, no status interview issues. It was a self-petitioning case. No issues at all, other than I think, he was born in Russia. And so I think they wanted to test that, and whatever that was, but everything was clean. It was the most vanilla, boring interview ever. But so, sometimes it's an operational thing. They say, at the local field office, we want you to conduct X number of interviews a day and keep personnel busy. And sometimes the bureaucracy gets you and you're the short end of that stick.
Yeah, so the bottom line is don't stress about why you were called in for an interview because it could be completely random. The most important thing where you can spend your energy is preparing for the interview, making sure you have all of your documents, reviewing your 485 application form to make sure there's not anything incorrect that was submitted, and just preparing yourself for that process. So, what do you do to prepare for an interview?
Yeah, so, first thing is figure it all out. What's going on and start preparing your documentation. We're going to talk about whether you should hire an attorney or not later. But start going through and collecting your documents. You're going to want a binder or I've seen people go home like suitcases because of all the documents, when you're talking about, a husband, a wife, a kid, maybe 2 kids, they go in there. So keep a copy of your I-485. And what I always tell clients is go through it. I don't know every law firm out there. Some aren't going to send you everything for review and accidentally mark something wrong. I would rather, if we're representing you in an interview, if you've had something marked wrong, let's address that at the very beginning of the interview. Like, hey, we reviewed everything. Page 10, question 4 is wrong. So go through it and then keep it indexed as well with all the exhibits, your birth certificates and all of that. Have your approval notice for your I-140, or if you're doing a family base, whatever, your I-130. Keep your perm labor certification if you've got it readily available and review it. 3 to 5 years of tax transcripts, W-2s, pay statements, all of your passports, visa stamps, even the old ones that are expired, all your I-797s, past, present, EAD cards, including when you were a student visa in 2012, your medical exam, if you haven't already submitted it, or if it's expired, bring a new I-693. Bringing in a supplement J or a employment verification letter. A lot of times we're going to talk about this. These interviews could be the last step. And so if you can prevent them from needing to send an RFE, bring it. Bring your birth certificate, marriage certificate. If you are married, bring documentation to show you all are living together, whether it's the tax returns or the mortgage or whatever it might be. And then look at your notice as well. Some notices will have, we want these very specific items for you to bring. So look at that, review it. But otherwise, generally, that's kind of a list I tell people to bring.
Yeah, and I'll add, if you do have a criminal record, you want to make
Yeah.
sure that you have the arrest record, all of the court documents showing that how the case was finally, the disposition of the final case, as well as any fines you paid or like any kind of punishment, showing that you've dealt with that. And you have to have all of that, even if it's expunged. So a lot of people think incorrectly that, well, the record's expunged, that means I get to treat it as if it doesn't exist. And that works everywhere except in immigration. And it can be a problem because if you didn't keep all of your documents and then you go and have it expunged, well, guess what? The record doesn't exist with the police department either or the
Yeah.
court. So you really can't get your records. Becomes quite a hassle there. Um, Another way to prepare is just think about what you're going to wear. It sounds silly, but you do want to treat this like a job interview. So you want to dress professionally. You want to show respect for the process and for the officer. So dress formally, Western formal wear, business suit, shirt and tie, um, just to, show that you are taking the process seriously.
Yeah, and there's not a dress code. I mean, look, I've been in USCIS offices and seen people in jeans and a t-shirt, but especially when we're talking employment based, I think it helps set the tone that you are a professional and you're, trying to just go through the process and you respect it. I mean, the officer will notice. I mean, it's not a question on the 485, but I think they will notice. One other thing, scout out the interview location in advance. I can't tell you how many people I've talked to that are like, oh, we made a wrong turn, we're running behind, or we don't know where to park or whatever. So go through that, know where to park. I can tell you the San Antonio field office, for example, it's in like a strip mall. There's like a Home Depot, another store, and then a USCIS office, and then another store. So it's easy to miss, right? So go ahead maybe the day before or 2 days before and just know, okay, I'm going to come here. And then plan to get there early. You don't want to be stressed with traffic, or running behind. You're also going to go through a TSA style security. And, even if you have a TSA pre check, it's not going to matter. You're taking everything out of your bag, taking your shoes off. And there can be a long line. And so just think about that. And then you're going to wait too. It's kind of funny. I always tell people if we start within an hour of your appointment, we're on time with it. Most USCIS offices, it seems.
Yeah, it's a lot of sitting around and waiting. So at the interview, usually, and every office is different, but usually they'll kind of have a section of windows where the first thing you'll do is go to an officer at a window and give your biometrics yet again. So you're going to take your fingerprints again, your photo again. They're going to verify your ID, make sure you are the person who's actually applying for the green card. Then you go sit down again and wait for your name or number to be called by the officer. You will walk back to the officer's actual office and you'll sit at a desk across from them. They'll have your whole file in front of them. They'll have the computer in front of them. They're going to swear you in, have you take an oath that you swear to tell the truth. They're going to check your ID, check your passport, and then they start usually with asking routine questions from the 485 form itself. So your biographic information, your full name, your date of birth, when did you enter, how did you enter, what visa status, parents' names, when did you get married, where did you get married, what's your address. Those are probably 90% of the whole interview process. And then they'll go into some of the grounds of ineligibility. They'll ask, have you ever been deported? Have you ever gone before an immigration judge? Have you ever been arrested? Have you ever been in jail? Have you ever, I don't know, are you a prostitute? Are you a terrorist? Are you a communist? Now, it's again, this whole form is what, 24 pages
Yeah,
now? It keeps
yeah.
getting longer and longer. And so there's a list of about 90 questions that goes through that. A lot of officers will spot check. They'll pick a few questions here or there, some of the more common ones. They already know the answers to all these questions. You already know the answers to all these questions. They just have to verify it. But some officers will literally read line by line every single question. And then your interview is going to take an hour just to get through that part.
I had an officer go through a whole bunch of the questions, and then he had like a pocket INA and 8 CFR, and he would kind of flip through and like look at it, and then look at the question, and then look it up. I was there for like 2 hours for a very normal adjustment of status interview. So, the big thing is answer truthfully. And if something needs to be changed, let the officer know. Like, oh, hey, I realize I said no, I'd never been arrested, but like, I just want to let you know I had this, didn't know, and fix it that. Don't let it become a problem. Answer truthfully. But after all those yes or no questions, where they ask like three different types of engaging in prostitution, and have you ever rebelled against the United States or whatever, they're going to talk about your job. How did you get it? What are your job duties? Who do you report to? What were your qualifications? What do you do? And explain it. And they're kind of looking to see, one, like, are you still being sponsored, and is this what you said you're going to be doing? Now, keep in mind, they don't know what you do in terms of really understanding what you do. They can read your I-140 and the 485 and the supplement J, but these aren't experts in the field. So I don't think you need to go through in a doctrinal presentation about the high level of AI and the nitty gritty. But hey, I do immigration work for our clients. We focus on employment-based immigration. I help them, achieve green cards by helping review and submit petitions. Okay, great. Like, what's your elevator pitch on this? And then, just be as, I think, concise but accurate as you can.
Yeah, and I think nowadays we're seeing a lot more questions about the job and how you came into contact with the company that's sponsoring you. Did you ever pay for part of the sponsorship? Has the company been paying you properly? Um, do you work remotely? Do you work for an end client? Who hired you? Who was the recruiter? How were you hired? Did you have to be interviewed? How did you find out about the job?
Did you pay for a job
Yeah,
offer?
definitely more in depth on that front, just trying to verify that the job offer is legitimate, which is part of the whole labor certification process as well as the I-140 process. But I guess they've got to really make it official at the 485 stage. But for family based interviews, it's a different type of interview. Again, they will go through all those 485 questions, but then it becomes focusing on the family relationship. Are you actually married? So it can be a lot more personal questions, a little bit embarrassing questions sometimes, especially if you're in front of the attorney. But yeah, it's just kind of part of the process.
Yeah, as attorneys, we've seen it all. I mean, I always tell them, just be honest with me. We'll figure it all out. And then keep in mind, the officer is rarely going to issue a decision right then and there and say, "Hey, congratulations, here's your green card." First off, even if they want to, they have to call the Department of State, make sure a visa number is available that they can issue and all that. They may say, "Hey, I need to review this with my supervisor," or "Hey, I need a complete review of the file." That's very normal. It's also very normal that I've done plenty of here in Houston where if the green card is current, priority eight's current and everything's been provided, that before I can drive back to the office, the case has changed to approved. But it's also not uncommon where they say, "Hey, we're going to issue an RFE or something that they might need more." It's okay. Don't panic. You're not going to walk out of there with a green card that day. Now, Emily, we've talked. Like you and I have both done green card interviews. Plenty of them. Should you bring a lawyer? Can you bring a lawyer? And what's our role?
Yeah, this is one area of immigration where you can have a lawyer with you. And no, it doesn't make you look guilty or bring, extra red flags to your case. It's your right as a person applying before the government to do that. And it can be helpful to have a lawyer. They can help make sure everyone understands the questions being asked and the answers being given. Sometimes things get off topic. Sometimes there's a misunderstanding and it leads to more misunderstanding and it just blows everything out of
Yep.
proportion. And so sometimes the attorney can just draw everything back to what the real issue is and make sure that there's no misunderstandings going on. It's also helpful if you do have any kind of legal issue, if you do have a status problem, if you do have a criminal issue, to have a lawyer with you that can help explain that. So they can't really answer questions for you. You're the one being interviewed, but they're there as kind of a fail-safe to make sure that everything goes smoothly and there's no misunderstandings happening.
I know I've had to explain to an officer what a supplement J is and like the impact. I'm sure you have too. So sometimes remember they don't always do employment all day, so it does help, kind of help drive that bus and keep everybody focused. If you're self-employed, you have complex immigration, work multiple jobs, maybe you haven't worked for that company yet. It is a future job offer. Been there. The officer had no idea how to handle that. and I'm trying to explain it. And they talk to the supervisor, like, "Oh yeah, you were right." It's like I had a feeling. But it is recommended if things are weird. Maybe you do engage with a lawyer, and maybe it's someone local, maybe it's someone not. I mean, we've traveled. I've gone up to Seattle, Orlando, New York. I mean, you name it. We've sent lawyers to it there, and then it's not court, right? I can't just raise up my objections there, right?
Yeah. Yeah, again, it's the lawyer's there usually sitting in the back of the room. The
Yes.
client sitting right there with the officer. Um, there might be documents that the officer asks for that the lawyer has handy because they've done these before and know what
Mhm.
documents, and so they can give documents to the officer and again help. If it sounds like the client has maybe misunderstood the question being asked or not quite on track, we can further explain or ask the officer to re-ask the question again or things like that. So we can't answer for you, but we are there to protect your rights and to make sure that you're being treated fairly, as well as making sure that interview stays on track.
Yeah, and from my end, if I think something's kind of weird, I make sure to note it and, kind of memorialize it so that way when I come back to the office, I'll put it in the file in case something pops up in a notice, or a request for evidence. It helps. And like I said earlier, if when we're reviewing a file and we see, we're talking to you and you're like, hey, this should have been yes, I answered no. One of the first things I'll do with the officer be like, hey, after you get him sworn in, by the way, we just want to submit this. We noticed an error. Want to get proactive on that. One thing to keep in mind is just because you had an attorney do your I-485 and they have the G28 doesn't mean you have to take that for the interview. You can hire your own attorney. I've had plenty of people send it to us here in Houston. Very competent immigration attorneys. So like, you guys are there in Houston, you take it. Or hey, do you guys travel to Philadelphia? You can bring whoever you want, do some research, make sure the attorney you have has experience and knowledge in the type of filing you're doing and experience doing interviews.
All right, so now we want to move on to some tips to be aware of and some traps to be aware of so that you don't fall into those. So, tip number one would be to review your I-485 form. Again, go through every single question, make sure that you remember what you submitted, take a look at what documents were submitted. Anything that was submitted as a copy, you should have the originals and be able to provide those, like your passport, for example. If you submitted copies of your passport, you need to carry the original with you. If you submitted a copy of your birth certificate, you need to bring the original because they want to verify that the copy is of accurate representation. You don't have to memorize your 485 and all the details in there. Just be familiar with it and be prepared to answer questions from that particular form.
And another tip, just again, be honest on everything. This is still an issue where you could have a finding of fraud or misrepresentation if you lie about something. But if you have something in your record that needs to be corrected, I always tell clients do the oath and then tell the officer, hey, we need to correct this. It's either going to be viewed as a timely retraction, which helps, that issue, or maybe it's just a typo. I mean, I've had plenty of times where somebody transcribed their date of birth wrong or something.
All right, now for some traps to be aware of. Number one would be failing to disclose an arrest, especially in the situation where you think it's expunged and you don't need to disclose it. So even expunged records do need to be disclosed. And just don't forget about your
I've
arrest.
had that. We litigated a 485 denial where the interview, we got the transcript from the interview. And have you ever been arrested? No. Are you sure? Oh yeah, I've never been arrested. No issues with the law. No. What about this arrest in 2009? Oh yeah, I forgot about that. Just they're not going to forget.
Yeah, yeah. So make sure that you disclose that. But what about traffic violations? Is that something you have to disclose?
No. So the I-485 in their what 100 questions, is very specific about traffic tickets. You get pulled over for speeding, you get pulled over for running a stop sign. Generally, you don't have to mark yes that you've been arrested or anything like that. Now, if you were put in cuffs, yeah, mark it and explain it, because I'd rather you do that. But typically, you don't have to. And if you do mark yes, it's likely to trigger an interview. The officer's gonna just ask questions, and you just have to explain. I have had people overcorrect and say yes, and the officer kind of laughs, like, you don't need to mark every speeding ticket. But they appreciate the honesty, but don't do it out of habit.
All right, one last issue to just be aware of is not having a valid job offer, assuming this is a green card that is based on a job offer. So we're not talking about the self-petition options. So if you left your sponsoring company and you're called in for an interview, you should be ready with a Supplement J form to show that you qualify for AC-21, same or similar job. And if you don't have that job offer, consider self-employment. Understand there are some risks with that. It may not be the best option, but if you don't have a job offer, you got to come up with something.
Yeah, and just some final thoughts here. The interview, is a final step in this long journey. Maybe it started as a student visa. You did your schooling, you did some OPT, then you worked, got sponsored, waited in the backlog, filed your 485, and waited years for it to become current again. And then now you have this. Understandably, people are nervous. I mean, every client I've represented on an interview is extremely nervous. They always tell me they couldn't sleep the night before, and I tell them they'll be okay. And they always end up feeling very much relieved when leaving. I mean, very rarely are people still nervous after. It happens. I get the stress. I will say, something we have not seen. I know the news talks about people showing up to USCIS offices for interviews and being arrested. We have not seen that for employment-based individuals who are lawfully present and all this. This is a very extreme measure, I think, for people that might be removable. That's not something we've seen yet. But I get the stress going into this. You'll be okay most of the time.
Yeah, if you're prepared, you're organized, you're honest, it's usually a smooth process. Think of it less of like a test and more of just like a verification. It's not meant to trip you up.
No, and so yeah, thanks for joining us. We started seeing more of these, so wanted to do a quick episode here, and thanks for joining us on Visa Vibes. Be sure to subscribe to us wherever you listen to your podcast, whether it's Spotify, Apple, YouTube. Follow us on social media, and if you ever have any topics, feel free to drop us a message. We'd love to incorporate.
And remember, immigration is definitely a journey. We're here to help you reach your immigration destination, and we'll see you next time.